Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. I don't know about you, but I'm still catching my breath from AUVSI Exponential last week, and I can't believe it's May already. And so we are transitioning this month to a whole new theme on advanced air mobility and vertical flight. And we're so pleased to have with us the CEO of Quantum Systems, Inc., Dave Sharpin, who is going to be the sponsor of this entire month. So Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, so fun fact, I met Dave in human form last week for the first time at AUVSI. I think we were both at the Auterian party. I think there was like 3 parties I went to that night. It was kind of nutty, but I got to meet Dave and talk a little bit about what he's doing and also visit with him on the floor. So we did our Clubhouse live from AUVSI. By the way, if you missed that, absolutely check out that replay. Those are available to the public. And, you know, I wandered onto the floor afterwards and saw his incredible booth with his aircraft. We're going to talk about those today at length. But just real quick reminder, speaking of live and live streams, that's what we're doing right now. So don't forget to drop your questions, your comments, your positive encouragement in the chat. We love all of it. And before we really get deeply into Dave and Quantum Systems and those incredible aircraft that he has that are vertical takeoff and landing, let's just talk for 1 second about the incredible month we just had. And I do want to remind you all that all of our episodes are available on demand on DroneLife TV. So if you haven't subscribed yet, absolutely do that. It will remind you when the upcoming episode, is next. So do that. But we had an incredible Thought Leaders Month sponsored by True Weather Solutions. Don Bershoff, the CEO, kicked that off. We did a live stream with Don right from the floor at AUVSI, and we saw his demo with the Meteor drone. So again, check all of those out. Some of that also is on my Dawn Zoldi YouTube channel. We had Dr. Jack Elston from Black Swift Technologies. By the way, Black Swift just won an AUVSI Excellence Award for the incredible work they're doing with Beyond Visual Line of Sight and their S2 aircraft. We had Elad Shalev from Skywatch AI talking about the incredible insurance and how to protect your business. We also had Glenn Lynch, the CEO of Volatus Aerospace, who's been an incredible sponsor of this podcast, doing the Volatus Above and Beyond series. And then we had a crazy amount of people, including Dave, right after Glenn, live from the floor. Gosh, I'm not going to run through them, but check it out again. That was a double header, so go back and watch that. But let's go ahead and Dave, I want to talk about you because you have such an interesting background. You are still affiliated with Auterion. You came from there before you started this company, Quantum Systems, Inc. So let's talk about your journey and how you got to where you are.
Okay. So my story over the past 35 plus years is mostly aerospace and defense with a little bit of commercial. I started out in the Air Force way back in the early 80s. Came back out of the Air Force and went back to school, got my master's degree, and then went back and worked for the Air Force for another 8 or 10 years as a research engineer, and then decided, hey, I want to leave government life, go out and do industry stuff because I haven't done that before, and that started my path in industry, from startups to working for large private companies to then working with publicly traded companies. I left a company called Orbital ATK back in 2015. They ultimately became Northrop, and then went to work for AeroVironment. And that's really where I got into the unmanned space. I ran the tactical UAS business for AeroVironment. I did that for 4 years and was a great time, but decided, hey, I want to try something else. And that's when I started the 2 businesses for Auterion here in the US. So Auterion, as you know, is headquartered in Zurich, Switzerland.
Yes.
But I started a commercial business here for them and a government business for here for them. And that was a lot of fun. That was doing something a little bit different. It was doing software and other things, but always related to unmanned systems. And then in January, we decided to stand up Quantum Systems Inc. here in Southern California, working on eVTOLs and getting back into the aircraft business, which obviously is my first love. So that's a really, really brief thumbnail of my career.
Well, and I know it's too brief because I'm sure you're being so humble, especially about your Air Force career, as lengthy, as it was in the different positions you had. But you and I both share that military background, and we do share something more recently. We're both, by the way, everybody, on Auterion's podcast with Romeo Dersher. I saw, Dave, you were on there. I was on YouTube, like pulling down my link, and I'm like, oh, look, he interviewed Dave too. So, so that's awesome. And so you started Auterion's, U.S. business, and you really, not to put a fine point on this, but to foot stomp it, everybody, this business, Quantum Systems Inc., really kicked off literally this year in January of 2022. Get your brain around that for a minute, because when you see these VTOL aircraft, it's going to blow your mind. So actually, maybe that's a great segue. Let's talk about your aircraft.
Sure.
You have two, and so let's talk about, first of all, what inspired you to create Quantum Systems and these two aircraft, the Trinity and the Vector, that we're going to see a little video on here soon. But what inspired you to create Quantum Systems?
Yeah, so myself and the founder, really, that in Germany that started this, he's a helicopter pilot, and a former helicopter pilot, I should say, and just a passion for flight. And they saw a real sort of gap in offerings where there's quads out there, there's fixed wing aircraft, but not a combination of the two.
Right.
And the inspiration really was to have this transitional vehicle that could take the best out of vertical lift and the best out of fixed wing and put them together in a very, very efficient way. And that spawned Trinity, which is our commercial mapping platform. And it also spawned Vector, which we're going to talk more about, which is really more of a military platform, but the same basic technology and this real passion for efficient flight is really what spawned everything.
No, that's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about Trinity first, and even the fact that Trinity could be dual use technology, right? So it's being used primarily in the commercial sector, as you mentioned. But describe Trinity for us, what it is and kind of what it does.
Okay. So Trinity, as I said, is a eVTOL. It basically transitions up from the ground vertically, and then transitions to forward flight in cruise. And it's made to be very, very efficient, so it can map out many, many hectares of land, over 700 hectares in a single mission. Flies for 90 minutes, and it has interchangeable payloads, so you can basically move in and out different payloads like MicaSense payloads or Sony cameras or even a LiDAR. And it's made for very, very precision aerial intelligence. That's what it's made for. On the commercial side, it's used in mapping and surveying, disaster relief, things like that. But as you mentioned, we actually donated 3 of those platforms to Ukraine, and they're actually used them for tactical intelligence. So getting down to less than a couple centimeters ground sampling distance, and so providing the warfighter in the field with basically their own mapping platform, whereas they may have to wait for maps for days to get them.
Right. No, that's awesome. And I do definitely want to talk about Ukraine here shortly a little bit more. But before we leave the Trinity, and I do want to talk about it more, I remember in Clubhouse, we had Jared Janosek in there. He's from Texas Drone Co. I actually quoted him in my last piece from Inside Unmanned Systems magazine about mapping and surveying. And I know his interest, and because he's an expert, I think it's worth repeating, Dave. His question to you was, how kind of low and slow does the Trinity go? Because that's so critical, right, for those mapping images.
Yeah. So Trinity flies about, and this is engineering speak, but about 14 or 15 meters per second. So think like maybe 25 miles an hour. It flies at nominally about 100 meters for the best mapping grade accuracy. But we've flown it in other missions, 400 meters, 500 meters up. And it really
Wow.
kind of depends on what the customer wants, whether they want to map something long and narrow or they want to map something that has area to it. And
Right.
so the speed is optimized for the platform as well as the imagery that we're taking. You never want to get faster than your camera when you're flying because you miss things. So that's why it's the way it is.
Now, you mentioned a bunch of different sensors, and I remember just from your booth, Dave, you had some, I think that you all develop actually, and then, but it's also plug and play with
Yep.
other sensors. So it's sensor agnostic. It's a modular open system.
Correct. So we try to make everything in Trinity is a case in point where we make a standard payload bay, but we're able to integrate different payloads. So the ones we make, we actually did the Cube 240 LiDAR, which is it's the smallest and lightest LiDAR that we've seen. And we also integrate other cameras that are best in breed. Mica Sense, best in breed cameras, Sony, best in breed cameras. And if a customer, wants to bring their own payload, as long as it meets the mass and the CG, then we'll put that in there. And that's a design philosophy and a marketing business philosophy as well.
Well, it's a good philosophy. I mean, the reality is also not only on the commercial side, but on the military side, the whole modular open systems architecture concept is something that all of the services have gone to. This idea that because they're using so many commercial products, they cannot be wedded to one system that is only, you can't have like, an Apple of drones, where you only have to buy their pieces and parts to make this thing work, right? So having that flexibility, I think, is really critical on the military side, but obviously on the commercial side too. Now, people are using this Trinity drone globally. I
Yep.
remember looking at your website, my mind was blown because it was like, we're doing mapping in Ghana and we're doing things with ski resorts in Norway. And you just mentioned Ukraine and the forces there on the military side using that for mapping of the battlefield. So can you give us kind of a quick around the world of maybe, let's just say 3 of your maybe most interesting use cases that are out there with the Trinity right now?
Okay. So you're right. It is global. We have thousands of systems out there now, and it's proliferating, and it's so easy to use. That's one of the reasons it's proliferating. You push a button, it goes off and flies and comes back to you. And so we're very big in India right now. We've provided a lot of systems to them. They do a lot of mapping and surveying the country. A lot of that hasn't been done. That's a big one. You mentioned Ghana, which is a very interesting one. We have folks in Central America mapping the rainforest, which to me is fascinating,
Wow.
and mapping deforestation of the rainforest and what the impacts are there. We have in Australia mining mapping that's going on. It's interesting how they do it. They do a lot of change detection. What changed in the mine, and they have to track that. So it's a lot of different use cases and a lot of different environments, whether that's cold or hot or wet or the forest. To me, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife that you can use for a lot of different things.
Wow, I like that. The Swiss Army knife of drones. That's a good one. So the mines you mentioned, they're like the open pit mines because
Correct.
because I mean I saw this aircraft. Can you kind of give people an idea how big it is, like wingspan wise, and like how heavy it is? Just because when you said that, when my brain went to mines, I'm like, this isn't working inside of tunnels. This is more an outdoor, right? This is
Correct.
more of an outdoor, like long range drone.
Yep. So the wingspan's a little over 6 feet. The fuselage is about 4.5 feet. It weighs about 5 kilograms. A person can pick it up and walk with it. It's made out of what we call EPP, so it's very light. And then the payload bay is on the bottom. It's kind of interesting with the batteries in the nose cone and the payload bays on the bottom. We usually have it the other way around, but in Trinity, that's the way it works. And basically, that's the platform, and it all goes together without tools.
I love it, and I know you didn't mention this one, and I have, but so I'm going to fixate on it just because, like, I'm in New York right now, but normally, right, I'm from Colorado. Skiing is a big thing for us. Tell me about the skiing concept in Norway. Like, what are you all doing out in Norway with the Trinity?
So basically mapping ski paths and things like that. I'm not as close to that one as the others, but I know
Right.
that we did some mapping of the different ski runs for them, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, Dave, you'll be interested to know there's a there's a gentleman from public safety in the Summit County Rescue arena. He comes onto Clubhouse all the time. I think he was there when you were there. His name's Mark, and we had him on the U.S. Colorado chats, and we talked about, can we use drones for avalanche type search and rescue, and they haven't been able to use that yet. I throw that out just for your consideration going forward, given the plug and play sensors you're able to employ on there. I imagine that could be a significant thing because it's such a dangerous operation involving avalanches, very tenuous, right, landscape there. And to be able to get to people quicker would be amazing. But I did want to say, Dave, we've got a couple people in the chat. I'd like to do shout outs too. So my buddy and yours, Matt Higa from Pineapple Express. He's listening from San Francisco, and he's asking, will there be a recording of this available? And absolutely, Matt. Always, 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 you can find all of the Dawn of Drone podcasts on demand on DroneLife TV. So, like I said, go ahead and subscribe to that, and you'll never miss one. And you can go back and watch them at your leisure. And then we've got Martin Cadriola saying this is a great interview. So thank you, Martin. I appreciate that. I know I'm having fun. I'm glad you are too. And I hope Dave is. Dave, let's transition from the Trinity to the Vector, because Trinity, obviously has military uses, and we'll talk about Ukraine in a second. But Trinity's really kind of primarily built for the commercial side, and that was kind of the big launch and the focus of Trinity. Whereas contrasting that with the Vector is really built for military uses and has commercial applications. So tell us about the Vector, and would it be helpful, Dave, to roll that video now to kind of let people see, and you can talk us through. So Mike, my incredible producer in the background, is going to roll this video, and Dave's going to talk.
So yes, this is Vector. That's in its fixed wing form. And you'll see that there are 3 rotors, 2 on the wings, 1 in the back. That's what lifts the aircraft and propels the aircraft. And I'm going really quickly here. This is the multi-copter version, or Scorpion. So basically, it's what we call a 2-in-1 system. You can change it from a fixed-wing aircraft to something that goes out and hovers. This actually is showing some of our processing in the front end. Our nose cones are all removable with different sensors. You can put different payloads on, and you can put different processing in that nose. Here it's showing how Vector is actually used in a tactical mission. So we typically use just one operator that puts together with no tools, launches it, and typically we don't even launch it this way. This guy put it up on the bag, but it can launch from anywhere. You can launch it from your hands. You can launch from the ground. It goes up, and then it transitions to forward flight, and that's the real trick. Doing it very seamlessly. A lot of vehicles will fall out of the air. They'll fall, many feet before they transition.
I love that. Dave, tell us what we're looking at here.
So this is looking at some of our AI processing. We're doing a lot of work where we're trying to operate without GPS. So that's what that was showing. Here is our first launch from a maritime boat. This has applications for the Navy and the Marine Expeditionary Forces. So we want to be able to launch and recover. This is actually our founder out there on the boat. He's launching it from his hands very gently into the air. It just takes off, and then it transitions back down. So launching and recovering from moving platforms is always a big thing, and VTOLs allow you to do that. And there's the recovery.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, he's just like gently, just like, oh, you
Yep.
know? So what's this part? Oh,
Uh,
that's okay.
that's okay.
I,
I think we cut it
yeah,
there.
yeah. So that looked like cold weather. I don't know that we need to roll it from the top, but we'll just keep going. So incredible to like see the vector in action. By the way, Dave, we have a LinkedIn member that was asking, "Are you going to touch on the capabilities of the vector?" So I hope we satisfied you. We're going to keep talking about that vector because like you, whoever you are, I was absolutely amazed when I saw the vector myself at AUVSI Exponential on the floor. You know, you guys had not only these videos going, but you know the actual aircraft there. And you and I talked about this, Dave, before we went live today. You know, some people refer to the vector as the scorpion in a way because when you add on those booms and make it into a quad, it kind of looks like a
Yep.
scorpion. But the proper name is vector, right? That's what you go
Correct.
by.
So we tend to get people a little confused because we do have two different vehicle types. And so here in the US, at least, we call it the Vector 2-in-1 system. In Germany, actually, they still keep the Vector Scorpion. But yes, it looks like a scorpion. That's why it was called that way. Vector is kind of a nerdy background name. You know, the vector has magnitude and direction. And so that's why it was called Vector. So
Well, I love it. And what you need to do, Dave, is add music from the Scorpions. Right here, I
yeah.
am. Rock you like a hurricane. That would be like spectacular. Not that the video wasn't good on its own with your voiceover, but that would be like I'm like buy me one now, like right now. So
I'll take that to the marketing department.
absolutely. By the way, Dan Julin is coming at us from Arium. Arium's in Canada. Dan is going to be a guest in June during our emerging industry leaders month, and they have the Robird. If you haven't seen the Robird, you should check that out. Talk about cool, but you know, scorpions, Robirds, all these things that kind of mimic, you know, biological creatures. I think you know makes a lot of sense because nature does good things and you know has good designs, so you guys are on the right track. But Dan's saying, wow, this is so smooth, nice work, Dave.
Thank you.
So how so let's there's so many questions I have about the vector, and I know other people do. By the way, if you all have questions about the vector or the Trinity or anything Dave and Quantum Systems is doing, absolutely drop that in the chat because this is live and he's here to answer those questions. We had a lot of great questions in Clubhouse. A lot of obviously military people in those videos, right? Let's talk about blue for a minute
Okay.
because you know, you and I've talked about this. I've written articles on the original Blue UAS program and now Blue 2.0. You know, 14 drones, 11 different companies added to that original list of 5. Um, Quantum Systems is new. It came about right in January 2022. List was already underway. Now, all of your parts would qualify, not only your aircraft, the vector, but all the components would qualify as blue. Is that correct?
Yeah, so blue from the hardware standpoint is a lot about is it NDA compliant to 848,
Yes.
things like that. So from that perspective, yes. The other thing is the software side, and blue is a lot about software and compatibility and having common components. So from that side, our vector system basically runs the Blue UAS software. So that's a really important thing. It's Mavlink compatible, all those good things. So yeah, so we're not in the Blue program, but we're tracking Blue compatibility. And I think that's an even bigger thing. Blue by itself and the funding they've provided to companies is really important and got a number of companies off the ground and
Yes.
actually attracted them to the defense side. But now it's about standardization and making sure that other systems can be compatible, even if they're not Blue funded. So that's actually a lot of the discussion that we had with DIU down at AUVSI. They were there in force, and
Yes.
we were talking through all that of how Trinity and Vector can be Blue compatible. and be a part of the overall ecosystem. And that's really what the DIU is trying to do. They've been
Yes.
sort of mavericks at trying to not only talk the talk about bringing commercial companies, but actually walk the walk and put funding forward and have programs. And for the Defense Department, that's really, really, really important because at least in the unmanned space, it was basically all kind of proprietary and things didn't talk to each other and that sort of
Right.
thing. And that's what they're trying to get around.
No, absolutely. I mean, so you're right. DIU was out in force. Shelby Ox, the co-program manager for the Blue US program, was actually part of my event, Law Tech Connect, on the Law Tech Connect workshop on Monday, talking about this very thing. And to their credit, Dave, I agree with you. Like, they leaned way forward. They moved out. When Congress passed Section 848 of the fiscal year
2020.
2020 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, they were already, the Army already had their short range reconnaissance program underway where they were looking at all these companies and drones for that. And they just kind of dovetailed in. And that's how that all came about, the first tranche. The second tranche, they put out I think they called it a CTO, commercial technical order or something like that. They put out a request. Industry answered the call. They culled through those, had some demos, like I said, 11 companies, 14 drones, all different kinds of capabilities. Whereas, the first group was very Army spec centric to become a program of record. These were like, well, who else has needs? And, what kind of capabilities you're looking for. So, I think where they are now, and I don't want to misstate anything Shelby said, but I've been talking to Shelby a lot too, because there's a lot of frustration out there, Dave. Where companies like yours have incredible, let's call them blue compatible, products, but they're not on the list. And you get people like Before You Go, who's in the chat right now, saying, "Is this considered a blue drone?" Well, technically no, but kind of yes. And so if you're not on that list, people are just kind of knee jerk, like, all right, well, this is the list. That's the easy button. It's kind of taken on a life of its own. I don't think DIU ever intended for that to happen. And I know they're looking for a way to onboard companies like yours in a more expedited way, almost like, hey, apply on a rolling basis and we'll just keep that list growing. Like, to me, that's the ultimate. You got if they can create a portal, if you can upload all your stuff and then they can say, yay, verily, this is cyber secure, this qualifies under the criteria that we have, good to go. I think that would be the ultimate, but I think they're building that and they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it blew up into beyond the first 6, which was really for what we call a program of record in the military.
POR.
And then the second tranche was for a non-program of record type customer, whether that's DOE or Agriculture Department or whoever.
Yeah.
And now it's because I know I've talked to them and I talked to Shelby down there. They're really trying very hard to bring others in. For example, we already have a program of record in the military, but they're talking to our program office about how that becomes blue, and how it complies with blue. So, I think that it's a work in progress. It's a good work in progress because we've needed this for a long time in this space. And they're doing sort of yeoman's work to make that happen with, they don't have thousands of people. They have a small group that's working this in the Beltway and out with the program offices to make it all happen.
No, absolutely. Yeoman's work, I think, is a good way to characterize that. And for those that didn't know, I did an interview with Shelby for Military Embedded Systems. They had a one-day kind of UAS workshop event online. So Google that, check it out, because he did kind of walk through the history, the process, and where they are. So you can get this right from the horse's mouth if you weren't able to come to my Law Tech Connect workshop. By the way, I'm hoping to have that content up on my rebranded website in the next 30 days or so. more to follow there. But Dave, you said you have a program of record already. Is it with the Navy, or which service is using the Vector right now in the
Yeah,
U.S. military?
so we do have an order. I cannot say who the particular
Got
customer
it.
is. The
You
U.S.
could tell
government
us,
customer,
but well, no, you could tell us, but you'd have to kill us, right?
something like that. Yeah. So we deliver those systems in August to that customer, and that's a really big one for us.
That's awesome. I mean, again, if you've been listening from the beginning, like, do the math here. They started this in January of this year, and they already are a program of record for one, at least one, maybe more, can't tell us, of the U.S. military. I mean, that's significant. Let's transition and talk NATO, and let's talk Ukraine in particular. Your company, Dave, is one of several, we'll call them commercial drone companies that have provided drones to the Ukrainian military. So tell us about that journey and how that's going, and where do you see this going in the future?
Yeah. So it started really grassroots. The invasion happened on the 24th of February. We started working on this, and to their credit, DIU was involved in making some connections. We wanted to do something. We couldn't go through the mainline governments because they basically just kind of do their own thing. So we said, well, we'll do this on our own with some help. So myself and a fellow colleague flew into Poland with 3 of our Trinity systems and trained some folks there to operate them, and made that donation to them, and they're now in Ukraine doing good work. Following that, we actually got an inquiry about our Vector for Ukraine, and sort of a different path there, but these were all sort of private donations, not government to government so much. And now Vector is there. And so really bringing, sort of cutting edge technology to that effort and fight, we felt was the best way we could support the people of Ukraine and what they're going through. But I think, if you read the reports that are coming out, it's obviously a David and Goliath type of confrontation.
Right.
But the Ukrainians are using drones in incredible ways to support their progress. I mean, they are really, really out front and really, really showing the way of what the future could portend. And I think that hopefully there's always lessons to be learned. Sometimes they aren't learned very well, but I think one of the lessons out of this is the use of drones in the right way in a tactical battle space is a really game changer. And I think that's what they're showing.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And this idea of blue, it makes a lot of sense, not just for the U.S. military, but for NATO, for our coalition partners, Partners for Peace, and for basically our friendly nations, we'll call them. Because when you think about how networked everything is, you think about the need for cybersecurity, but more importantly, you think about the need for assured autonomy and control on the battlefield. How can you possibly trust a company that can remotely shut down your drone? As an example, so we've heard, again, rumors. I'm not going to be a rumor monger, but I'm just going to throw out there. Let's even hypothetically say that a particular country has a drone that has a capability that, almost like remote ID, you can see the other drones on the battlefield, and you can, more importantly, see the operator's location, the control station. I mean, you just created a whole bunch of targets if you're sharing that with one company and not another, one country and not another. I mean, we've all heard the rumors. To me, that is significant. Now, there's also been some information like this company is not, now selling, drones to either country, but that doesn't mean that private people can't send it there. And that's the concern I would have. Like if I was on the battlefield, I want to know that my equipment's actually going to work.
Yep.
That someone else is not going to be tracking what I'm doing from, an adversary country, or shutting down. Like, yeah, I want to make sure it's going to take off.
Yep.
So to me, this idea of having a blue, UAS for NATO and our partners, why would we not do that? Because you want to make sure that any equipment we use is cyber secure and, compliant and reliable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a big thing on the battle space. I mean, and the one thing I would put forth is that having standards doesn't mean that you can't be have assured autonomy and you can't operate in jamming environments and things like that. And
Right.
that's a big push for us, which is if we're in a jamming environment for GPS, for example, how do we continue the mission?
Yep.
And that's something that we're working on very strongly, and a lot of others are too.
Yes.
And then the communications, our data links, are they secure?
Yep.
Can we remain anti-jam on them? So this is kind of a crucible, if you will, in Ukraine for us to sort of learn that.
Yep.
Everything to this point has been sort of hypothetical, at least for the United States in this space. But Ukraine, there's jamming all up and down the 300-mile line. So we're
Yep.
having to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, Dave, obviously you had your incredible drones there. When I walked the floor at AVSI, and sadly I didn't get to walk it. I walked a lot, but I didn't get to stop and talk to a lot of people just because I was pulled in so many different directions last week. But here was my observation. Multi-domain event, primarily aerial vehicles, uncrewed aerial vehicles is what I saw on the floor, primarily. And the enabling technologies for them, such as what you're just saying, anti-jamming, detect and avoid, all of these things. Getting back to the Ukraine thing, one thing that occurred to me that I never thought about until I had these conversations, like with people like you, when remote ID gets effectuated, right? We know that commercial drones are on the battlefield right now as we speak. When remote ID becomes a thing, and to the extent that that remote ID transmits the location of the operator, once again, why I think it's such a bad idea to have that information available publicly. Because, the drone pilots here are worried about, some angry Joe Q public person tracking them down and attacking them because they're being attacked, sadly, more frequently than you'd think, just for doing their job, domestically in the US. Now take that to the battlefield. Commercial drone with remote ID, the enemy can now find the location of the operator because of that remote ID. I don't know, Dave. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I think that there has to be, remote ID is sort of weighing public privacy and safety together in the national airspace, and I kind of understand why that's really
Of
important.
course, it's needed.
On the battle space, though, we would want to turn it off. is the bottom line.
Yeah, at the same time, if we're turning it off, we need some kind of situational awareness technology.
Sure.
Because not everybody's got the IFF, like Sage Tech's, right, MX-12B on board. So I could see a value, and I think Pierce Aerospace isn't doing this, right? Like the value of remote ID, even in the military environment, but like, again, how do we tailor it so it doesn't become a liability? It becomes an asset, but not a liability for the warfighter.
Right.
So
Agreed.
interesting times indeed. And I agree. I think the term you used, and I think it's a great one, is there's a crucible happening right now in Ukraine, sadly. But I think there will be a ton of lessons learned from there. So Dave, we saw you at AVSI, or at least I got to. It was awesome. Where might you all be next, like with your Trinity and Vector? Like what other events might you be frequenting in the upcoming months?
Yeah, so on our commercial side with Trinity, they have a number of shows, and commercial UAV is one of the big shows that they'll be at. On the government side, we're actually going to, our next one is AUSA, which is in October, so we have a bit of a hiatus
Wow.
from that. But on the commercial side, yes, they'll be at all the conferences you can think about, which are related to GeoInt and imagery and things like that. They do a number of those shows, both here in the United States and globally. So you'll
Yep.
see Trinity a lot. Vector won't be able to see that more till maybe the fall timeframe in Washington, D.C.
Well, awesome. So besides some of these conferences, both on the military and civilian side, do you have anything up and coming? I know you talked about maybe a tranche in order coming out on the military side. We can't get into details on. Is there anything you can tell us about what we might expect coming out of quantum systems over the next couple months?
Yeah, so at EVSI, we introduced a new payload for Vector. Having multiple payloads is a big thing for us, and bringing more customers in that way. So that was one of our reveals there. I also sort of revealed in the Alterian interview that we have some things going on in the back room in terms of new platforms. So that was, kind of a teaser that I came up with at the last minute, but it's true. So over the next, I would say 8 to 12 months, you'll see us probably introduce a new platform to the family, and that's really what we want to do. We want to build a family of these platforms that, and the sensors, and the data links and all that stuff, that folks can come in and say, I want that. Here's your base model, but I want these things that you add on to it, and kind of like going and buying a car. So I think you'll see a lot more of that. We'll be doing a number of demos for customers. We have one coming up in June in Montana. I think we'll have video from that. That'll be an interesting, we'll be up near Ted Turner's ranch in Montana.
Oh, cool.
Testing different things. So I know we'll have stuff that comes out on that. We're starting to do stuff for my business in Asia Pacific, which is a big push for us. So I think you'll start to see us there as well. And then, as we talked about, Don, I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and that's usually a nice portal for people to see sort of what we're doing.
Well, that's a great point. Everybody, if you're not following Dave Sharpin on LinkedIn, you need to be, because I agree, he is very active. I think you're posting up at least one, maybe two things a day. You're giving me a run for my money there, bud. But I appreciate you and everything you're doing, and I hope you'll come back and visit us. Fun fact, big reveal also on my end. It maybe wasn't big because it was like in my event, and we had maybe like 80 plus people there. But Mike, my producer, and I are going to be launching 2 new platforms of our own coming up here soon. 2 podcasts, The Full Crew and The Full Tilt. So more to follow on that. Dave, I hope you'll come back and join us maybe on one of those. And absolutely in the next 8 to 12 months when you launch something new, I hope you visit us again, because this has been really spectacular. The chat's been blowing up. By the way, Chris Wedgeworth is saying hi, and Francesca Harding says that she loves the work that is happening here. So thank you, Francesca, for the positive encouragement. Really appreciate that. And they're here to see you, Dave, not me. And really looking forward to seeing what you do going forward. How far you've come just since January is, like I said, just absolutely mind blowing. I'm looking forward to you getting on that blue list, and let's give you the floor here. We're getting real close to the end of our time. So how can people reach you? What words would you like to leave them with?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, LinkedIn is probably the best way, the conduit to me, and then we can further that with email and phone calls and things like that. I try to make myself as accessible as I can, running the company. I think that we're on the verge of something really important in this space, and I think unfortunately Ukraine may be focusing that in terms of the utility of drones and what they can do. Obviously, in a conflict, that's one thing, but it leads out into many other things that we do in our life. At some point, Ukraine's going to have to be rebuilt, and drones are going to play a part there in that process.
Yes.
as we go forward. And it's very, very unfortunate, but we need to have the tools ready for those folks to use. And there's no higher calling in my mind than helping people that are in distress, and I think our industry can do that in many ways. So that's kind of a thought to leave you with.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So I know, thank you for that, Dave. And I agree. It's really interesting when we think about drones for good stories. Most often people don't think about drones on the battlefield, but because I think there's a negative connotation in many people's minds. But when the work you're doing with the Trinity and now the Vector in Ukraine, I think flips that script on its head, because really what you're doing is you've entered into this with technology that is helping, I'll call them the good guys in this one. And so thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you've done. Chris Geneseth is out there asking, are there any new systems in development? Chris, we just talked about that, buddy. Check back in 8 to 12 months. And Richard V says, Dave, you are the best. And Dave, Richard, whoever you are, I agree. Dave is the best. So thank you so much, Dave,
You're
for
welcome.
spending this time with us, for sponsoring this month of advanced air mobility and vertical flight on the podcast. I really appreciate you. I'm so glad we met. By the way, we did meet on LinkedIn. That's a whole nother story. We'll tell you some other time. And as we close out today and we continue this month of advanced air mobility and vertical flight, please mark your calendars. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have Clifford Cruz, the CEO of Skyway, is doing some really cool stuff when you think about kind of the traffic management that's going to have to happen there. So it's going to be a fun conversation. I met Clifford a couple times now in person, including he was there last week too, Dave, at AUVSI. I think most of us were. So thank you again, Dave. We're going to sign out here. Absolutely connect with Dave, link in with him. And if you have any questions or follow up, you want to buy that Vector or that Trinity, reach out to him. And thank you again. That's all she wrote. Fly safe.
Take care.